Coming up on the Week 2 episode of Wonder Room, the action's really starting to heat up across the league. Nico and New Moon already off to a better start than they were last week, but can they keep that momentum up and continue towards a potentially undefeated season? Aleph and Ambertown looking to do the same thing, but with an old veteran like Will in their league, would they be able to withstand the pressure? Kitakami and Little Root were a tale of 2 weeks, but were they really so different after all? A very interesting tense set developing over in the Sapphire League. And Heart Home and Miss Stroughton going head to head to try to gain some ground in that crazy Sapphire race. Week 2 of NWBA Wonder Room coming up next. Wonder Room is brought to you in part by Booze Mobile and by Kurtz's Chicken. And now for your host, King Vasser. Hello everyone and welcome back to Wonder Room. We are 2 weeks into the season. This is usually around the time that we start to figure out a little bit more about these teams, where they fit into the hierarchy, start to see some separation in the standings. And while that is normally the case, not exactly the case in Season 7. While there are a few teams that have distanced themselves from the rest just a little bit, for the most part, we still don't really have a clear-cut answer of who's good and who's not in this week. It's been a very interesting week, and we will get to that in just a little bit, but first we've got some more important news. Corway is suspending operations for the foreseeable future in Season 7. GMZ has decided to step away from the NWBA, citing a need to take a mental break. We understand his circumstances. We wish him the best. As far as the NWBA is concerned, right now there are 15 teams in operation. If there is another person who is able to step in and take over for Corway, we will let you know as soon as possible. But for the time being, Corway will be under suspended operations for the remainder of Season 7. Now, typically, the interleague matchups are the ones that people find to be the most interesting, the most entertaining. You get matchups between teams that you're not going to get to see unless they meet in the NWBA finals. But in Week 2, a lot of the best action came from intra-league play. It makes a lot of sense. Of course, those tend to be the more important matchups because you're talking about head-to-head tiebreakers coming into effect and whatnot. And in Week 2, 4 of the best sets of the week came in interleague play. New Moon and Ambertown both started Week 1 undefeated, but they knew they'd have their hands full once that target starts to show up on their backs. And Nat Green Sitting and Veilstone both had something to say about their chances of staying undefeated through the second week of the season. Meanwhile, Sapphire League had a lot of action. Little Root and Kitakami, a matchup between two teams that are in different parts of the standings, but as far as play is concerned, not too far away. Little Root started off the season pretty poorly, went winless in Week 1, but they have been competitive. Could they knock off Kitakami and get some momentum going towards the season? Meanwhile, Heart Home and Miss Stroughton, two teams that went 2-1 over the first week of the season, could either of them take that step towards being a higher tier team in the Sapphire League? Nat Green City and New Moon, they were the first match of the week. Hatch and Nico going at it. Zarud and Overquell the leads. You see Spike's SD Overquell. We've seen Nico run this quite often in Season 6. Goes for a gunshot on turn 4, trying to read a switch, ends up taking the Scorching Sands for a lot of damage, able to do a big amount to the unaware Skeletors, but Skeletors is going to be able to live, get some damage on Darkrai. Diancie comes in, the pace gets slowed down a little bit more. Caesar comes in on a Diancie Spike, obviously scares this thing out. In comes the Gyarados, and you see Life Orb chip come in from Caesar, and then you see the T-Wave from the Gyarados. So a Life Orb Caesar set and a defensive Gyarados, both very interesting choices. You don't really see those every day. Caesar going for the SD on the switch, tries to go for a dual Wing Beat on the Slowking, doesn't get the KO. What it does get is a Flamethrower right to the face. So, Nat Green City out to an early lead, but in comes Darkrai to get the revenge KO. Wisely reads the switch, gets off a nasty plot, Gyarados has to go down. So in comes Zarude, It is in fact Scarf, goes for a knockoff rather than going for a U-turn or potentially a CC. So it goes down to a Sludge Bomb, Breloom comes in to revenge KO, and Overcrow gets sacked on the spikes. So in comes Clefable. Diance's going to be able to bring in, eat that Moonblast up decently well. And then you see the Cosmic Power come out from Nico's side. You know he loves to run the setup Mons. It's a question of which Mon is going to be the setup merchant. This time around, it's Clefable. Skeleton, of course, has Unaware, so these stored powers aren't going to do that much. But you have to remember that Clefable is also Unaware, so the Torch Songs are only going to do about 40. So now it's a stall war, essentially, and on turn 29, with Clefable up to +4/+4, stored power is doing enough to nab the KO on Skeledirge anyway. So now things look very dicey. Breloom comes in to try to get revenge KO, but this thing is choice banned and not loaded dice, so the Bullet Seed is going to have to crit for Hatch to have a chance of getting this Clefable out of the picture. Doesn't get it on the 5 hit, and on turn 33, doesn't get it on the 3 hit, goes down to a stored power, and that is pretty much going to wrap up the first game. Hatch trying to do some switching around. Hopefully someone will be able to take a stored power, but no one's going to be able to take 2. So Diancie goes down. It's all up to Slowking. And stored power is doing more than enough. Ice Beam not going to get the freeze. And game 1 officially goes to Numu. We move the game to Superior. Diancie out the lead. So Superior takes the opportunity, gets up a sub. Gets the peril on the Skeletorch, but you got to remember, Torch Song's a sound move, goes right through the sub. Superior gets blown up for its trouble, so Dreadnought has to come in, and you see Gastro Acid, Nico in his bag, and the team builder looking to shut down the Unaware Skeletorch, but he doesn't have a great way of hitting Zarude, so Dreadnought's gonna have to go down to a power up after getting off the liquidation. So Nacron City out to an early lead, but a big crit on the second hit of a dual wing beat means that Caesar is going to be able to pick up the KO on Skeledirge. Soul King comes in, and then Chili Reception's out, so in comes Breloom. Nico going for the SD, but like we said, that's a banded Breloom. CC easily takes Overclow off the senses. So now Clefable has to come in and try stored power nonsense again. In comes the defensive Gyarados. You see Whirlpool come out, and pay attention to the damage. That's Binding Band, Taunt, T-Wave, Protect Gyarados. So you talk about Nico in his bag in the team builder where Hat says, hey, I got something for you too, buddy. So this Gyarados, tailor-made to stop a lot of Nico's offense, but in particular does a good job of shutting down the Unaware Cosmic Power stored power Clefable, and on turn 21, it eventually goes down to the Whirlpool chip. So now it's 2 versus 5, Nacron up big. Darkrai gets the Sludge Bomb off on Gyarados, takes the Mach Punch, which does not get the KO thanks to the Topple, but is going to be more than enough for Zarude to pick up the KO with the U-turn, and with just Caesar left, that's an easy flamethrower for Slowking G, was going to eat up that dual wing beat no matter what. So now we move to game 3. Rotom H is brought in place of Superior, gets off a nasty plot off the start, gets some big damage off on the Diancie as Slowking G goes for a Trick Room. But Overclow comes in, scared of the Diamond Storm, then Caesar comes in. So Diancie able to get some good chip, it's got to lead because it's that afraid of the Life Orb Bullet Punch. Slowking G takes the hit, tries to think that Nico might get greedy again, but doesn't. But that's just not with Caesar. On turn 7, he does go for the nasty plot. Diancie has to come in, but Nico once again scared of this thing. So Overquill comes in, but he gets body pressed. So Hatch making some good decisions. Guesses right on some 50-50s. Overquill goes down. Caesar comes back in. Hatch reads it again, knowing that he would go for the dual wing beat, and gets up rocks. So now you know he's going to bullet punch this turn. Gyarados comes in, guesses right again, and decides to trap this thing. Nico going for the SD, so Hatch really preying on Nico's habits, able to take Caesar now off the map, thanks to Gyarados. So in comes the Rotom Wash, you know the discharge is coming. Diancie can take one, but it can't take a second, so Nico gains a little bit of ground back. In comes Skeledirge, gets paralyzed, but there's a lot of chip with that Shadow Ball, so now Rotom Heat can't really come back in. Gets off the big Critical hit on the discharge before going down to a torch song, so Skeletor is basically dead. Clefable comes back in, starts the cosmic power nonsense again, and this time is actually able to get the better of Gyarados. But Nico's still down 4-3, so this is still looking like a Nat Green City win, and because Clefable only got up to +1, Bullet Seed does just enough chip that even though it goes down to a Moonblast, Zarude's going to be able to pick up the KO, doesn't miss the Power Whip, crucially. And now with two Mons slower than Zarude on the field, Skeletor gets sacked to the Dark Rise, Zarude comes back in. Hatch wisely U-turns out into Slowking. Nico's gotta go for a Shell Smash. Hatch once again wisely pivots out. You know that this thing doesn't have a way to hit Zarude, so it's gotta go for a Liquidation. Gets blown up by the CC. And with that, it's just Darkrai left. And Hatch deciding to let Slowking G get a little bit of chip. Gets off just enough with the Flamethrower plus the burn to enact a little bit of BM in a way. So it lets Darkrai pick up one last KO, allows Slowking G to pick up one last assist, and for Zarude to finish it off with a U-turn. So with that, Nat Green City knocks off the previously undefeated New Moon Darkrai. Zarude with 5 KOs leading the way. Clefable and Darkrai both big performances in a losing effort. But at the end of the day, a very even match ends up with Nat Green City getting the upset, moving to 2-2 on the season. Amber Town and Veilstone Ruby League action coming in. Primarina and Gastrodon are the leads. Gastro gets up rocks as Primarina starts the sub Calm Mind offense. We've seen Aleph be one of the GMs that likes to utilize setups, so Will trying to turn that medicine against them. Azu's able to break the sub, but you notice the playoff is only doing 20%, which means it's a roll to break the sub, and as it turns out, this is Sap Sipper Azu and not huge power. Aleph admitting after the set this was in fact a team building error, so Primarina is going to be able to take this thing out with very little chip taken out the gate. Lucario comes in, gets off a big Meteor Mash, but Primarina is going to do a lot of damage to Draining Kiss and get a lot of impact as well. So Primarina, 9 turns in, takes 2 Mons out, still at 50%. In comes the Dragapult, which reveals that it's Power Herb Phantom Force, but that's not going to do enough to get the KO. Primarina gets even more back from the Draining Kiss. And so that's 3 Mons down on Amber Town's side from the Primarina. So in comes the Captain Titan, goes for an Ice Crash, maybe going for a flinch, doesn't get it. So now Aleph figures the only card they have left is Belly Drum, but it goes down to a Draining Kiss. Primarina gets the KO, and that's going to be the first game. So we move to game 2. Tentacle and Hoopa the leads. Aleph switches out, so Hoopa's able to get off some big damage on Gastro, and it's going to go down, but not before getting off the rocks. Lucario comes in, Wrench KO, gets off a huge CC. Hoopa goes down in 1 hit. So in comes the Primarina again, gets off the sub. And then the Tentacle reveals its Swords Dance. But Will is prepared, has Psychic Noise for this Tentacle. Aleph going for the Rapid Spin, maybe it was a roll, we'll never know for certain because it didn't break the sub there. The second one will, but at that juncture, Primarina's going to pick up the KO regardless. And so once again, the Water Fairy starter causing some problems. So Titan comes in, Belly Drums immediately this time. Takes a decent amount of chip from Draining Kiss, but the Ice Crash is going to finally take Primarina off the map. So in comes Venusaur, has to Terra Water to avoid getting one shot by the Ice Shard. Venusaur is going to be able to pick up the KO, so Veilstone still with a slight lead in this faster paced game, but Dragapult can set up 2. DD comes in, and the second DD, Dragon Darts, takes out Thunderous T. The previously seen 1-turn Phantom Force comes in, and that's going to be game for Amber Town. So we move to game 3. Thunderous T and Como the leads. Aleph once again deciding to try to dictate the pace. Goes for sub Belly Drum Salic Berry on Como, but goes for a CC. Maybe it had the coverage of Scream Tail, maybe it didn't. Either way, it was the wrong option. Scream Tail picks up the KO, and then Will bravely staying in, getting off a T-Way on Tentacool, and gets it to get paralyzed, but tries to bring in Thunderous, doesn't get lucky, so it goes down to 2 gunk shots. So in comes Hoopa, which one-shots the Tentacle. You think Thunderous T might have been useful for later. Scream Tail comes in, gets Meteor Mashed, Hoopa comes in, gets Meteor Mask as well. Gets off a lot of damage with the Drain Punch, but it's not going to KO, so it's going to go down to a second Meteor Mash. So in comes Walking Wake to take it. Gastrodon comes in. Big Draco Meteor comes out, but Gastrodon's able to live. And then calls Will's bluff on the switch. Gets off the recover. So now this thing's going to live a Hoopa hit and get off rocks again before going down to a knockoff. Once again, slight lead for Veilstone, but that's not going to matter when the Terra Normal Bandit E-Speed comes your way. Primarina comes in, gets off the Draining Kiss, so Titan is going to come in and Belly Drum again, and lives the second Draining Kiss, so Walking Wake's going to have to get sacked here to the Icicle Crash. Will's got to bring in Venusaur, and he has to Terra, otherwise Venusaur goes down. Aleph not going for the Ice Shard, realizing that the end game is still in sight. Dragon Ball comes in, gets off a first DD, and then gets off a second DD. Will not able to get a crit or a Death Drop, and so Venusaur is going to go down in one hit to the Phantom Force. Primarina's the only mon left, and while it won't go down to the Phantom Force, it's going to do more than enough damage so that even with the Draining Kiss and Leftovers recovery, the Lucario E-Speed is going to take the victory. So Ambrit Town had to struggle for it. A faster paced game again, but a victory nonetheless. They move now to 5-0. A big performance from Primarina, from Veilstone on the losing side, but unfortunately they drop to 2-3. And notably, Walking Wake finished the day no KOs, 2 deaths for -2 points. Littleroot and Kitakami, don't let their records fool you. Two teams that are much closer than they appear. Slowbro G and Rabambi the lead. CJ, of course, getting up webs early, but AZ getting some good chip with the flamethrower coverage on Metagross. So Entei has to come in. Quaquaval comes in to counter that. But the Sacred Fire, of course, you know that high burn rate comes into effect. So Quaquaval effectively taken out of this game, that Aquastep doing absolutely nothing to Cresselia. So AZ decides to get out of dodge with the U-turn. And you know what time it is for Cresselia. Calm Mind, it has worked so well for CJ this season on a myriad of mons as well. Low kicks, gonna try to shut this thing down, but the Terra fighting coming through in a big way. And that Moonblast is gonna take low kicks off the map for its trouble. Cinderace comes in, does good chip with the Pyro Ball as Cresselia continues to boost, but you know Crest never leaves home without a Moonlight. And on turn 14, the stored power is gonna be enough to take Cinderace out of the picture. So now in comes Necrozma, and it's going to have to try to Calm Mind alongside Cresselia. We've seen these games before as well. So what looks to be a slower paced game. Uh-oh, the big crit coming through for CJ. A massive stroke of luck coming in. Garchomp gets blown up by the stored power, and with that, that is an absolutely dominant game one coming in for Kitakami. +6 in the first game. We move to game 2, Cinderace and Rabambi the leads. Cinderace getting off the Power Ball, doing a decent amount of chip to Entei as well, and then reveals that it does in fact have Court Change, so it stops Stomping Tantrum from doing a lot of damage, and it puts the webs up on CJ's side, so that's going to completely change the complexion of game 2. Crest comes in to block a Garchomp EQ, doesn't go for the setup, just gets off a Moonblast, so it's going to get good chip on low kicks. Terra's again, no need to Terra with Entei. Terra fighting on Cresselia gives it so much more mileage against both Garchomp and low kicks. But the swap was indeed in place of Quaquaval, and you see why the side shot coming in doing massive damage to Cresselia. CJ knowing he can't play that game forever. So the Bisharp is going to have to come in, but that Defiant going to do nicely for it. Gets the +2 and then takes Slowbro G out with one throat chop. Entei comes in on the Cinderace, takes a lot of damage from the low kick. Goes for the extreme speed, but CJ forgetting that that thing is blocked by Psychic Terrain, mashing a little bit, ends up losing Entei as a result. Rabambi goes down to a U-turn, and so now Littleroot has a little bit of an advantage. Garchomp revealing the Poison Jab coverage on Enamorus does more than enough to stop it from subbing up, and so a second one's going to take it down. So Littleroot once again in the driver's seat, but the end game is going to be difficult to manage. You've got Cresselia inviting in DD often, but that is just a reason for Bisharp to take something off the map instead. So Garchomp goes down. It's going to require a little bit of work from here on out. Cinderace comes in, gets some good chip on Crest, is able to get a burn. And CJ, realizing he's got to start Calm Minding, does so. Cinderace pivots out into low kicks. Crest healing up. And now AZ just trying to play pivot games, trying to keep Cresselia guessing on when it is safe and not safe to go for Calm Minds. The Cosmic goes for a Calm Mind to bait CJ into Calm Mind again. So Indeedee's back in. You know the side shock's gonna hurt. He goes into Cinderace to expecting the Bisharp switch. It goes well. And then U-turns out again into Indeedee. And then CJ stays in on the Expanding Force. So AZ gets multiple turns in a row consecutively. It pays off. Healing Wishes out on the Bisharp. Doesn't need Indeedee anymore. Cinderace is now healthy. Goes for the low kick first to make sure it stays a fighting type to deal with Bisharp. The Power Ball going to take out Metagross, and it's not going to matter. The low kick's going to take out Bisharp anyway, so a well-played game 2 from Littleroot means that we're going to game 3. Cinderace and Entei started off. Entei gets off a big Sacred Fire, gets the massive crit on the Slowbro-G and the burn for good measure. So in turn 2, it's already 6-5 in Kitakami's favor. Cresselia comes in on a Garchomp Rock Slide, trying to catch an Amorous. CJ pivots out into Rabombi, gets off a Bug Buzz, is not going to put up the webs, knowing that Cinderace has court change, instead going for the regular chip route, but Cinderace is going to able to take out Entei with the low kick. Rabombi has to come in, revenge KOs with a Moonblast. Crest comes in, takes another Rock Slide, and you can see the pace of the game change in real time. CJ not going for as much setup this time around, just trying to get some chip early on. Goes for another Moonblast after the Terra, drops Necrozma on the special attack, reads the Indeedee switch in with Bisharp, gonna get some good damage off on Garchomp with the Throat Chop, goes into Crest again. This thing completely shuts down Garchomp, so AZ gonna have to play some more guessing right, and right now CJ's winning that game tremendously. Bisharp comes in on an Necrozma Calm Mind, gets off massive damage with the Throat Chop, enough damage that the second one is going to KO through the Iron Defense boost. So now it's 5-3 AZ in a pretty bad way. And not many answers to this Cresselia. Garchomp goes down to 6%. AZ fishing for a poison, finally gets it on the poison jab, which is when CJ figures it's time to start getting some Calm Minds going. Indeedee comes in. Crest is back up to full. And he switches into Bisharp, waiting the Encore. And then AZ goes for the Healing Wish in desperation. It will get Garchomp up to full, but it also means that the only real answer to Cresselia is now out of the battle. Low Kicks is going to knock off the item, but it's not going to matter. It doesn't do enough damage to this thing. And with that, CJ is going to Calm Mind up, get enough boost, take a first impression from the Low Kicks, and then take it out on turn 32 with the Moonblast. Garchomp, the only one left. We already know this thing can't really touch Crest. Moonblast is gonna almost KO it, and then CJ wanting to get some Wind Diff preserved, goes into Metagross and gets off the Expanding Force of his own. So a pretty good showing from Littleroot, especially in that second game. Cinderace with a nice performance, but they fall to 2-4 in the season, 1-4 against the Sapphire League. They have really struggled in their intra-league matches. In the meantime, Kitakami moves to 5-2, a career best start for CJ behind big games from Cresselia and Bisharp, combining for 10 KOs. Hardhome and Miss Stralton, two teams fighting for positioning in the Sapphire League. Great Tusk out the gate, goes for the CC on Samurott H, but the Focus Sash comes through, and the Razor Shell is going to pick up the KO right out of the gate. Another Razor Shell comes out from Samurott, but Tinkaton is able to pick up the KO with Gigaton. In comes Iron Boulder with that booster energy. Mighty Cleave gets paralyzed, but because of the booster speed is still faster, picks up the KO with the CC. So in comes Umbreon. That also gets CC, but it's not going to do enough to pick up the KO. Foul Play certainly going to be enough. So 5 turns in and 4 Mons have already hit the deck. Umbreon hits the Terra Poison as it goes for Moonlight. And then Fortress reveals Pin Missile. We know Ball Heat is one of the more creative battlers in the league. But Power Trick on top of that, we have never seen a Fortress set like that. Hoopa gets brought in, immediately goes for the Terra and gets off a nice Psychic Noise, so does a lot of damage to Umbreon, stops it from being able to Moonlight. Beku staying in, doesn't really know what the Hoopa set is. Eventually goes down to a third Psychic Noise. In comes Tinchino. Hoopa swaps out into Salamence. Still takes quite a bit of damage from the Tail Slap. And then Cinchino switches up to the triple axle, so Salamence goes down. We're down to a 3-3 game, just 12 turns in. Cinchino goes for the tidy up, takes a decent amount of damage from the pin missile, swaps into Latios to try to read something. Instead, it also gets pin missiled, so that's a lot of damage. Has to flip turn out. Cinchino comes back in on the Hoopa, then gets hit with a psychic noise, so we know that the Hoopa is now scarfed. Deoxys comes in, presses Meteor Beam, the power up comes through, picks up that KO, in comes T-Tar. And while Deoxys Speed does have superpower, T-Tar was expecting it, showing the Chopple, knocking off Deoxys, taking that out. So Latios was able to come in. It picks up the KO with the Aura Sphere, but with Fortress at full, Draco's not going to do anywhere near enough, even with the crit, before a pin missile takes Latios down. Hearthome takes a fast-paced game 1. On to game 2, Tinkaton and Samurott H the leads. And exchanging of pleasantries, hazards go up. Samurott does some good damage to Tink, but the T-Wave comes through. Tinkaton gets the knock to take away that sash. And figures to stay in, get a little bit more chip before going down to another Razor Shell. So in comes Great Tusk. Gotta play a guessing game. Salamence comes in. Headlong Rush comes out. So while he guesses right there, Deoxys Speed comes in now. Takes a good chunk of damage from the Air Slash, but not enough to pick up the KO. So Meteor Beam is going to come through again. Takes Samurott H out. In comes Fortress. Beku tries to read a switch or something. Presses Meteor Beam again. Instead, it goes down to a Gyro Ball. So Fortress picks up another KO. Salamence comes in on Great Tusk. Takes a lot of chip from the CC, and you see that it's not boots. So Salamence already fairly low. Air Slashes on the Umbreon, tries to get more damage. Instead, it's going to go down to a foul play. No flinch or anything comes through. In comes T-Tar. Umbreon foul plays again, just trying to get some chip on this thing. Gets knocked. Figures that T-Tar can't do much to it. Ball Heat switches back out into Fortress. These two mons can't really touch each other much, and with the Sandstorm up, Umbreon can't even heal very well. But of course, after the Terra, there's no amount of damage that Fortress can really do meaningfully to this mon. Tries to read a switch. Instead, Umbreon just roars it out. In comes Iron Boulder. And you know this thing doesn't want to take a foul play. Mighty Cleave not doing enough. So Boulder goes down. Mr. Alton back in the lead, but only for a brief moment as Hoopa gets the Ren scale with Psychic Noise. So in comes Tusk again. Picks up the KO with the Scarf Headlong Rush. T-Tar comes in. You know it can't take a Headlong Rush either. And so it's down to just Fortress. It's going to live on Great Tusk and pick up the KO with the Gyro Ball, but being slower than both Latios and Cinchino, and Aura Sphere is enough to tie up the set at 1 apiece. Game 3, Infernape is the swap and the lead, but Ball Heat immediately switches out. Beku calling him out, goes for the Stealth Rocks, and then paralyzes the Samurott with the T-Wave. Gets a big knock. While he goes for a second layer of spikes. Tinkaton comes in with the Gigaton Hammer, gets a lucky paralysis. Stays in, keeps getting lucky. It's doing a lot of chip to the Samurott now. 3 straight turns of para. And at this juncture, Tinkaton can live a Razor Shell and Sucker Punch back to back before taking out Samurott H with the Gigaton Hammer. So in comes Hoopa to pick up the Revenge KO. Tinkaton goes down to a Dark Pulse. In comes Umbreon. Infernape is the switch in, ends up getting Toxic. And then Ball Heat goes for the double with the Fortress, maybe trying to read Latios or something. Instead, Umbreon just terras, gets off some damage. And then Ball Heat presses Explosion with the Fortress, only does 42%. So, tries to get just some momentum going, terras with the Hoopa, goes for the second noise. Latios reads that, in comes T-Tar, takes a lot of damage from the Draco. And then Beku, figuring he has a lead, cuts his losses, just goes for the Aura Sphere to clear out that Chopple Berry. But Ball Heat goes for the Stealth Rock, so the bold play ends up working out. T-Tar goes down to a second Aura Sphere. Hoopa comes in. Latios stays in again, blocks the Psychic Noise, and then flip turns out into Deoxys Speed. So now this thing can pick up another KO with Meteor Beam. So things look really dicey for Hearthome. Now they're down 5-2 in the set. Salamence is gonna able to come in. Beku swaps into Tusk, takes the Air Slash. He's okay with letting Mons go at this point, up huge. Latios comes in, gets the Revenge KO with the Draco. It's down to just Infernape. We have no idea what the set is. Shows knockoff. So in comes Deoxys. And it's not going to matter because it's too fast for the Infernape anyway. Shy Shock picks up the KO. So while this set does not make the Sapphire playoff race any clearer, it does let Mistralton pick up a massive win over a previously winning record team. 12 total assists for the Metagross, a very good team effort. Hearthome dropping to 3-3 with Mistralton, a very big win in the Sapphire League, and one that will no doubt have massive implications in the playoff race down the line. Now, we already mentioned that while most of the teams are in fact still bunched together, there has been a little bit of separation in the standings. And as we head into this by the numbers section, it will be very apparent just how impressive that team separation has been, especially considering they've already made some pretty impressive NWBA history. Starting with the Ruby League standings, Ambertown has emerged as the breakaway team in the league. 7-0 record, 14-2 game count, undefeated in week 2. They have now set the record for most consecutive wins to start an NWBA season. So congratulations to Aleph, already making some NWBA history. 7-0, a phenomenal record no matter which way you slice it, no matter what stretch of the season it comes in. The fact that it came at the beginning of the season means some accolades come that way. Cirencester moves up to number 2 after their nearly perfect week. 3-0-1 on the week moves them to 4-2-1 on the season, 8-4 in games. They have created some distance between them and the rest of the field in the Ruby League, although there is still quite a gap between them and Ambertown. Veilstone, Black City, and Sicily all sit at 3-4. Veilstone with a 1-3 week, while Black City and Sicily went right down the middle at 2-2. Corway and Mount Coronet both sitting at 2-4-1. Mount Coronet had a good week, 1-2-1, but Corway even worse, 0-3-1. And considering that team is now undergoing suspended operations, who knows just how far they will fall down the standings unless another GM steps in to take their place. Sunny Shore sits at the bottom at 2-5, but they did not go winless this week, grabbed one win, keeping them just a little bit in pace with the rest of the league, so not too far behind whatsoever. Over in the Sapphire League, the race is considerably tighter. New Moon and Kitakami both sit at 5-2 after Kitakami's 3-1 week and New Moon's 2-2 week. New Moon sits at the top due to their head-to-head tiebreaker with Kitakami, but both teams sitting at 5-2 and barely having a lead on the third place team means the Sapphire race is a lot more interesting. Mauville sits at 4-2-1 after their 2-1-1 week. They have a little bit of an advantage over the rest of the Sapphire League, but not enough of an advantage that they can go ahead and rest easy for the rest of the season by any means. Mistralton, Hearthome, Littleroot, and Nacloon City all sitting at 3-4. Littleroot with an impressive 3-1 week. They started off 0-3, but that did not deter them whatsoever. They've already made a pretty considerable turnaround and are very much in the thick of things. Nacloon City went 2-2 with a big upset victory over New Moon, so that is a lot of momentum their way. While Mistralton and Hearthome both went 1-3 on the week. Not great, but in Mistralton's case, at the very least, they got a big win over Hearthome, while Hearthome was able to knock off Kitakami. So both getting fairly notable wins. Mistralton, because of the fact that they have beaten all three teams below them at 3-4, they currently hold that tiebreaker. So that's very interesting to note as of this point in the season. Humanlaw sits at the bottom at 2-5, but with a 2-2 week, they are already starting to turn things around. And it is important to note that they have hired Muffin, GM of the Verbank Venoshock in Season 5, which were your Sapphire League champions, went to Game 5 in the NWBA Finals. That's a big hire. You're talking about two players in Kobe and Muffin that have made it to the NWBA Finals before. So Humanlaw's already gaining some momentum. We'll see just how well they're able to convert that down the stretch and see if they can really start jumping some teams in the standings. A lot of movement in this week's power rankings. Of course, with all the moving parts and pieces and how tight things have been thus far in the standings, it only makes sense that teams are going to move a spot or two for the most part, but we did have some pretty notable movers. Ambertown is now the top team after their still undefeated start to the season. Sirchester moves up to second after their phenomenal week. Kitakami jumps New Moon notably in the power rankings, moving up to 3, while New Moon drops to 4. Mauville moves up to 5. Little Root moves up to 6. So after being the last ranked team last week, they jump 10 spots all the way up to the top 6 in week 3's edition. Black City moves up to 7, while Veilstone drops to 8. Nat Queen City jumps up to 9 over Mistralton and Hearthome, which dropped to 10 and 11 respectively. Mount Coronet drops pretty notably to 12. Sicily and Humala moves up to 13 and 14, while Sunyshore and Coralway move down to 15 and 16. You can expect to see things move like this for the rest of the season, with teams being so close together. It would be a surprise to see any of the teams that are in the middle or bottom of the pack stand pat unless something drastic happens, such as Coralway having to suspend operations and not being able to find a GM for the week. We will be keeping track of that situation and will inform you of any changes as soon as we possibly can. But for the time being, this is what the power rankings look like, and Coralway might be holding down that number 16 spot for a little bit. The Week 2 stats leaderboard looks like this. Titan leading both KOs and points once again with 29 and 39 apiece. Primarina of Veilstone and Cresselia of Kitakami tying in second with 15 and 26 in KOs and points. Interesting to see Cresselia up here. More of a defensive mon. Gliscor and Venusaur tie for 4th place with 13 KOs for Mount Coronet and Veilstone respectively. So Veilstone had a pretty big week offensively. Yuxi led the league in assists this week with 10. Not a surprise, we've seen Yuxi on the stat leaderboard many a time. And we've seen Hippowdon many a time as well, racking up 9 assists for Black City. Gastrodon of Ambertown and Samurai H of Hearthome both put up 7 assists. And the tie in 5th place belongs to Tinkaton of Mistralton and Mauville's Flygon. Arcanine of Sirchester and Cinderace of Littleroot tying in 4th place with 24 points apiece. That is already been a very effective free agency pickup for Sirchester, for Arcanine to, in just 1 week of play, already put up 24 points on the season. Whimsicott comes off the bench from Mauville and posts the weekly high of 5.5 points per game. Very impressive performance there. Gliscor comes in second at 4.6, a Titan with 4.3 in third, and then Arcanine with 4.0 and Primarina with 3.7. But Gliscor ends up edging out Whimsicott for KOs per game on the week with 2.6. Whimsicott had 2.5. Titan in third with 2.3, Primarina with 2.1, and then a 3-way tie in 5th at 2 exactly between Arcanine, Darkrai of New Moon, and Latias of Littleroot. For the second week in a row, the Ruby League Pokemon of the Week goes to Titan. Led the league in KOs and points once again, and it's 4.3 points per game and 2.3 KO per game. We're both second in the Ruby League. Not much to say about its performance other than this is the most prolific start we have ever seen to an NWBA season. We have seen more impressive week 1s, but those mons have seen a sharp decline in production after that first week because teams are more wary of what they're able to do. But in the case of Titan, who is, again, for what it's worth, an NU Terra captain on a very strong team around it, this mon has been able to go unbanned and put up monster numbers. So at this point in the season, it is not a question of can Titan get to 100 points. It's a question of how fast is Titan going to break the all-time points record, because it is on pace for an unfathomable 226. We have never seen a mon put up numbers like that, and it's only a matter of time before either people start banning this thing or this mon destroys every record that we have ever seen in its path. A lot of second-time evers being displayed for the Pokemon of the Week awards this week. Titan was the second ever Pokemon to win back-to-back Pokemon of the Week awards. But over on the Sapphire side of things, Kitakami is the second ever faction to have separate Pokemon win back-to-back Pokemon of the Week awards. Last week it was Enamorous Eye. This week it's Cresselia. Its 15 KOs and 26 points led the Sapphire League and posted a respectable 2.6 points per game and 1.5 KOs per game. Kitagami's had a phenomenal start to the season, and they've been able to do it in different ways and with different mons. Cresselia, one of the more defensive-oriented mons in a draft league format, but because it's been a Terra Captain, that Calm Mind, Store Power, coverage option strategy that has worked so well this season ends up nabbing it its first career Pokemon of the Week award, and a very surprising but deserved one at that. We move now to the final section to look ahead to next week, and we've got to say, while this is the point in the season where you start to figure out who's good and who's not, because of how things have shaken out thus far in the first 2 weeks of the season, there's still a lot of questions to be answered. This is also the part of the season where teams look to make a lot of changes, and boy howdy were there a lot of changes this week in the free agency market. A grand total of 22 free agency signings were made over the course of week 2, so we've got so much to cover that we're going to need a second slide. We will start with Chichester dropping Iron Jugulus for Iron Thorns, and because of the way they have constructed their roster, they actually had 3 Terra points sitting around waiting for an NU pickup. So Iron Thorns is a Terra Captain with Terra types in Flying and Fairy, making sense. Flying to stop any ground moves that would absolutely destroy Iron Thorns, and Fairy just because it's a good defensive typing on a mon that does have considerable bulk. Humalau underwent one of the most absurd roster reconstructions we have ever seen in NWB history. They made 6 moves over the course of the entire week. It starts with getting rid of Swampert for Rhyperior, getting rid of Slowbro for Amoonguss, getting rid of Reuniclus for Cyclizar, and getting rid of Toxtricity for Vikavolt, which they made a Terra Captain with types in Steel and Fairy. So right off the bat, Humalau undergoing a lot of change, swapping out defense for a different kind of defense in Swampert Rhyperior, 2 regenerators in Slowbro and Reuniclus for other regenerators in Amoonguss and Cyclizard, and then a strong PU mon that also can put up webs, something Toxtricity could not do. In the middle of those moves, Sunny Shore gets rid of Corviknight for Skarmory, so switching out Steel Flying types, interesting maneuver there. Black City opts to get rid of Colossal and signs Delphox, making it a Terra Captain in Dark and Fairy. Much more sensible move. Colossal was a questionable one on paper, maybe as an emergency spinner, but instead gets a pretty strong mon that can definitely utilize those Terra types to flip matchups on its head effectively. Veilstone opts to get rid of Oricorio Pom Pom, seeing as that it didn't really have a place on the roster with Thunderous T around, and opts to pick up Dragalge, which was released last week by Littleroot. Makes it a Terra Captain, and the same types as Oricorio as well, Ground and Steel. So some better defense for certain, but also one that can be offensive if it really wants to be. Humalau makes another change over the course of the week, getting rid of Houndstone for Milotic, making Milotic a Terra Captain in Poison and Dragon, so swapping out some defense once again. Black City opts to get rid of Enamorous Therian for Mimikyu, so getting rid of a mon that has good bulk and a fairly solid typing, but doesn't really have any utility for one of the premier setup sweepers of all time, especially among lower tiers. Mimikyu, its disguise ability having that built-in substitute being very effective. Miss Stralton opts to get rid of Tornadus Eye and picks up Houndstone that Humalau dropped, making it a Terra Captain in Water and Fairy. So exchanging a very fast, pretty strong mon for some better bulk. Obviously, Miss Stralton, one of the fastest teams in the league, so it makes sense that they will want to shore up the defense. Sunny Shore makes another move, gets rid of Comfey for the recently released Enamorous Therian, so did not stay jobless for long. Makes sense. Comfey is one of those mons that really relies on Terra to do its most damage, and because of the fact that Sunny Shore couldn't make it a Terra Captain, was kind of just sitting on the roster, so instead picks up a much stronger, much bulkier Fairy type right out the gate. Amber Town makes perhaps the most interesting decision of the week, gets rid of Azumarill to pick up Comfey. So they decide, hey, Comfey's a good mon, and we would like it on the roster. It makes sense given Ambert Town's setup nature, but when you consider you're talking about Belly Drum, Huge Power, Azu, the things that Mon can do compared to Comfey, it seems a little odd on paper, but perhaps Ambert Town just wanted the extra utility that Comfey adds with things like Priority Leech Seed and Aromatherapy. Sicily opted to get rid of Komala for Heracross because of their point situation. They could not make it a Terra Captain, but even still, that is absolutely an upgrade. Komala, one of those mons that only has one job, and that's really to be an emergency spinner. Sicily figuring that it would be way better for their team to have a strong physical attacker sitting in PU instead. Sunny Shore's third move of the week was to drop Serena for Mag Mortar. Interesting to note that they are another faction that has decided to release their second NU Mon and instead pick up a third PU Mon. Sirchester picks up Swampert after it was released and gets rid of Registeel, improving the utility on the defensive side. Registeel, a good defensive mon stats-wise, but lost a lot of the utility it had in previous generations, including some very important moves like Seismic Toss. Sicily makes perhaps the most confounding move of the week, gets rid of Terra Captain Noivern for Blastoise. Normally this wouldn't necessarily be an issue, but Blastoise counts as UU for this season, meaning that as of right now, Sicily only has one Terra Captain on their roster, that being the Arumon Chestnut. So Sicily is going to have to run the week with only one Terra Captain. Also important to note that if this move had happened early in the week, at the very least, they could have made the newly signed Heracross a Terra Captain, but instead, they're going to have to rock with just one. That being said, Blastoise, with its Shell Smash offense, can be far more potent than Noivern was, and can also provide a little bit of defensive utility if needed. Humalau's record-breaking 6th transaction of the week was to release Hydreigon to pick up Azumarill, so again, big roster overhaul, two mons that are both pretty strong offensively and have enough bulk to take a hit or two when necessary. Of course, Azumarill far stronger than Hydreigon. Veilstone, however, figures that more utility is better than more offense and gets rid of Hoopa Unbound for Hydreigon. Interesting to note that Veilstone now has 5 members of the Akala Island Speedstars from Season 5. That's important to note because that is the most Pokemon that is shared between two rosters of completely different GMs in NWBA history. Heatran, Thundurus T, Hydreigon, Slitherwing, and Quagsire, all members of both teams, so that is a pretty fascinating anecdote. Hearthome gets rid of Iron Boulder for Hatterene, figures that Iron Boulder wasn't impressing, and decides to go with some better defense. Amon, like Hatterene, that is always annoying to face, very bulky, can be dangerous with Calm Mind. Sirchester opts to get rid of Vaporeon to sign Logan H, figures it doesn't need the added defense, would rather bring back a mon that they are familiar with. Was pretty successful for them last season, even amongst the hustle misses. So, Blades figuring, again, why fix what isn't broken? Brings back an old friend. And then lastly, Mauville releases Decidueye to sign Glastrier. Again, talking about familiar faces, this is a favorite of Lux. They have been using mons like Glastrier all the way far back as Season 2. So, bring in a familiar face. They've always appreciated the legendary horses of Gen 8. And decides that Glastrier could be an enticing option, making it a Terra Captain with Ground and Fairy, and hopefully that will fix the ever-present mono ice issue that Glastrier has always carried. Looking ahead to the schedule for Week 3, the second week of Interleague play, and the final week of fresh intra-league matchups. So, after this week, we will have officially hit the halfway point, and everybody will have played their intra-league rivals once exactly. So that will decide early tiebreakers and such. And as a result, those matchups are going to be pretty interesting. Teams have changed quite a bit from where they were at the beginning of the season, but that first time you fight a league rival is always going to be important. And of course, you can't forget about those juicy interleague matchups. We're starting to see now that teams have done some separation a little bit, some clearer matchups, and just how important they're going to be down the stretch. And speaking of important matchups, our key matchups for week 3, we've got once again 5 very interesting head-to-heads. Heart Home and Humalau will face off on Versus Seeker, the first edition of the Battle for Toronto. Ball Heat and Kobe getting to meet on the battlefield for the first time as GMs. Other Versus Seeker matches include Mistralton and Sicily, 2 teams looking to break back into 500. And then perhaps the biggest matchup of the entire week, if not the entire season, New Moon and Amber Town. Typically, this league has had some bad luck with the best 2 teams on paper in each league getting to play each other, but in the case of Season 7, you're going to see the top-seeded team in the Ruby League and the top-seeded team in the Sapphire League, as of this week, going head-to-head, so that's going to be a phenomenal Versus Seeker match. Elsewhere, you got Black City and Sirchester in a pretty big-time Ruby League matchup. Again, Sirchester had a fantastic week. We'll see what they can do against Keith and the Poniards. And then lastly, Kitakami and Mauville, the 2 and the 3 in the Sapphire League right now. So a very big matchup that could definitely go towards determining who can end up getting that top seed and the Sapphire Ribbon, but also a chance to knock one of those 2 teams back down into the shark-infested waters that make up the rest of the Sapphire League. That's going to wrap it up for this week's episode. Thank you all for watching. I've been your host, King Vasser. Stick around. Coming up next, Versus Seeker triple header action. Should be a fun night. We'll see you soon.